I think at that time we'll begin to realize the real benefit to the people of planet Earth.
The space station is just the beginning. It's the stepping stone to allow us perhaps to take a trip to Mars, to build another space station around Mars.
But to critics, the space station is the single biggest mistake NASA has ever made.
The space station currently stands as the largest single obstacle to the continued exploration of space. It is expensive. There is no science. It has no purpose any longer at all.
T-minus 3 minutes and counting.
Tonight, NASA's longest journey to the launch pad is finally over. It is their night to show the world how America builds a space station.
T-minus 2 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. Everything continues to look good with the weather.
OTC already hit the clear on the F7.
T-minus 1 minute and counting.
We are go for launch.
And we have had to cut off the countdown. We did not pick up the countdown in time to meet the very end of our launch window.
The story of the International Space Station is a tale of dreams and disappointments. The current plan is that it will provide a unique platform for humans in space, a laboratory for scientific research, and a focus for international collaboration. But the purpose of the space station has changed many times over the years of planning, and it is now at the center of a debate which has challenged scientists and governments for 40 years. Is it worth sending humans into space at all? The space station is a crucial step to fulfilling the age-old dream of humans journeying to the stars.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
As soon as humans left the Earth, they became heroes, pioneers in the quest to colonize the solar system. In 1969, 3 American astronauts went to the moon. But to NASA, this was just the beginning of an even grander voyage.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The long-held dream was to build a permanent human settlement in space, a space station in orbit around the Earth, with a crew of scientists living and working on board. NASA engineers had plenty of ideas of how it might look, but they hadn't yet solved the huge technical problems of how to keep humans alive in space for years at a time. They would need to devise complex life support systems that could recycle all the air and water for the crew on their isolated spaceship. And there was a more basic challenge. How could the costs of sending humans into space be justified when there was already a much cheaper and easier way to explore the solar system? NASA scientists working away from the manned program had been dispatching robotic probes into the cosmos since 1962. The information they were sending back was revolutionizing our understanding of the planets and the universe beyond. And they cost a small fraction of the manned space program. Humans had traveled 250,000 miles to the moon. Probes had traveled 1 billion miles past Saturn.
There was a debate between those who wanted to put men or women into space, on the moon, on Mars, or whatever. And the other view was that you could do a lot with machines. And the weight of the evidence came down on there being much more that could be accomplished at much lower cost with machines than with humans and without the same risk.
Throughout the 70s, NASA's plans for the space station were quietly shelved. And by the early 1980s, the dream could have died altogether. Were it not for a challenge that had dogged the Americans and their ambitions in space for years. A challenge from the old Cold War enemy, the Russians.
The Russians believe in the long-term space station in orbit. Their Salyut craft have been up for years. Russian cosmonauts hold all the records for spending really long periods in space, and they speculate on the possibilities of building up really large stations from which they could launch further rockets to the planets.
There was one American president who was determined to meet this challenge, and in 1984, he declared his intent.
America has always been greatest when we dared to be great. We can reach for greatness again. We can follow our dreams to distant stars, living and working in space for peaceful economic and scientific gain. Tonight, I am directing NASA to develop a permanently manned space station and to do it within a decade.
And so, Space Station Freedom was born. The trouble was, the costs of designing and building it would be phenomenal. NASA prepared itself for a showdown with the White House budget team.
Well, I was budget director, and I had responsibility for putting together the president's budget and how much would be spent on each agency, including NASA. When we went into the cabinet room to have the meeting, and there were the NASA people, and I had my people from OMB, my mouth open, my jaw dropped, because right there, sitting in front of where the president was to sit, were all these little models of the space station and the launch vehicles and so forth. The president came down, he sat down, and he picked these up, and he goes, that's interesting. And he starts turning them over, and I'm over there sweating like, oh my gosh, I could see my losing this contest. In the end, he sided with NASA and not with me.
The space station of President Reagan's dreams would be far larger than anything Russia had ever put into orbit, and its main purpose would be commercial. For every dollar spent on the project, NASA predicted $7 would be generated back on Earth.
The benefits to be reaped from our work in space literally dazzle the imagination. Together, we can produce rare, life-saving medicines, saving thousands of lives and hundreds of millions of dollars. We can manufacture super chips, and we can produce special alloys and biological materials that benefit greatly from a zero-gravity environment.
There was good reason for optimism. Weightlessness, or microgravity, was an alluring phenomenon that promised to improve the efficiency of industrial processes. American business was expected to leap at the chance to invest in the enterprise. But first, NASA would have to come in on time and on budget, building the space station. Freedom would need to be in orbit by 1994 for a total cost of $8 billion. But as soon as NASA started seriously to analyze their plans for the space station, they began to see just how ambitious their original vision had been. It would be difficult to achieve at any cost, let alone $8 billion.
Remember what you're into now. You're into a very high-tech, never-done-before type of a job. So a bunch of people get in the same room and they claim that they can get the job done, and I think that maybe they get a little bit over exuberant in what they think they can do, and then the real truth hits them downstream.
We had said that we could build the spacecraft for the space station in its original form for $8 billion. The president said that's okay. In fact, what happened was, in a funny kind of way, we had sort of shot ourselves in the foot. This particular piece you see here is the manned part of the program. But let me tell you a little bit about what we've got here as a result of that, recognizing that it may not look anything like this by the time we build it. The model that we showed to the president was conceptual, and we had done very little work from a design point of view. We only had the broadest sense of life support system, and we had the broadest sense of what experiments we could do. So you really had to go a lot further before you could say, yes, we can now build that.
NASA invested in their first redesign. Gone was the central cluster of modules. The station would be more stable with the crew quarters at one end, pointing towards Earth. The new arrangement was radical, it was ingenious, and 12 months later, it was scrapped. The design would have generated such a strong gravitational field that it would make all microgravity experiments impossible. This was a blow. By now, it was already 1986. 2 years into the project, and they were already seriously behind schedule. The $8 billion NASA needed from Congress had become $12 billion.
Agencies have incentives to lowball the estimates to get Congress to buy on. Once Congress has bought on to a big program such as this, they don't want to admit error, to confess it wasn't a good idea from the very beginning, so they'll throw more money and more money and more money just to cover up the fact they may have made a wrong decision at the very beginning.
Still on paper, the new design began to grow. Partners from Europe, Japan and Canada were invited to bring their own modules on board. NASA then planned to enlarge the framework, imagining adding solar and stellar observation platforms, telescopes, a satellite servicing enclosure, and solar panels with options for multiple solar energy collectors. By 1989, the blueprint had grown to show a 500-foot megastructure, and the projected costs had quadrupled. Worse, the flood of investment from American businesses had failed to materialize, undermining Reagan's original vision. The space station needed a new purpose. In 1989, a new president took office. George Bush gave NASA its new mission.
We must commit ourselves anew to a sustained program of manned exploration of the solar system, and yes, the permanent settlement of space. And then a journey into tomorrow, a journey to another planet, a manned mission to Mars.
As well as planning for Mars, NASA was told to cut the price back down. The space station design was stripped and shrunk, and yet the projected cost just kept growing. By 1992, just 2 years away from Reagan's deadline to put the space station into orbit, NASA had spent its entire original budget. All the money had gone on research, designs and redesigns, but not a single piece of hardware had gone into space. The entire $8 billion had been spent, and they still had no space station.
In fact, what happened was most of that $8 billion got spent on people, salaries and expenses. The one thing we had done was to spend the $8 billion. So that was kind of sad in a way.
And then things really started to go wrong. The Russians had not been idle. They were busy working on Mir, their own permanently manned space station, launched in 1986. It was modest, it was cramped, it was smelly, but it worked. And it was proof that the Russians had solved the important problem: how to keep crews alive in space for years at a time without huge supplies of fresh air and water from Earth. The cosmonauts on Mir were rebreathing purified air and using water recycled from their own sweat and urine. It was unlike anything America had ever put into orbit. Compared to Mir, the American plans began to look overly ambitious.
Американцы еще в чем ошиблись? А делать огромные станции с огромными батареями, с огромной энергетикой. Чисто американский подход. Если делать, то вот